Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about maps. Heck, you saw the title, but I'm going to be talking about maps that were influential to me and talking about what influence I got from them, like what about my mapping style actually was changed from what I learned from these maps effectively, right? So the most influential one probably is World is Mine. It's a Supercell song mapped by Celerih. This sparked my appreciation for Celerih maps. Celerih is one of my most favorite mappers, for those who know me. And it really helped sort of bridge the gap to my appreciation for Undead Capulet maps. And it got me out of doing so much Monstrata stuff. Like before, and this is actually a surprise for a lot of people who know my apps now, but I used to be like a very big Monstrata fan. And then I contribute a big part of my moving away from this as a result of Celerih and this map's influence. Because what I really liked about this map was that it was very simplistic in its approach, and the way it played was extremely fun and engaging. But I didn't like do anything super crazy. And I liked that it was much more inspired and it took a more creative, I guess, interpretation, tried to actually capture some of the nuances of the song in it, say its movement and other aspects in it. And so we're going to be talking about some of those things. Again, this is a fairly simplistic map. I mean, Celery is not um, some. I mean, some people might call them a movement mapper, but I don't think that I would put them in that same boat as somebody like Undead Capulet or Hollow Wings, right? Like this map was designed to be pretty fun to play, and so like starting off, this stuff is pretty straightforward. Celery's big, on using these heavy curve sliders. You'll see this fairly often in Celery maps where they use these heavy curves because this to them is big emphasis. Like it emphasizes that held vocal by having the player kind of not really move their cursor very much. So you'll see this occasionally. The stopped movement here, and then it goes a little bit of a jump here. All this is pretty straightforward. Lots of like this overlapping stuff for this section. A lot of these like kind of 90-degree rotated parallel slider patterns will be used in this map. So that's going to be something that you'll see a fair amount. They do a really good job of arranging them in such a way that the emphasis makes sense. Like, for example, here, this one has more emphasis because the spacing is larger on this one here, and it's that anti-flow idea, right, where the implied movement of the slider is up, you have to actually go down, so there's this conflict, this mental conflict that the player has to deal with as to where they're supposed to move, which gives this 4 a little bit more emphasis. Big spacing here. As the song kind of changes. It's a new measure, so there's that. They likely did not NC this because they wanted to have that follow point, so that's probably why. And then slow slider. It picks up again. Again, it's that held curved slider. They really like that for these longer held vocals. They do a great job of like sort of stopping movement here and then getting these jumps, right? Like even this kind of thing, it's not like a huge jump or anything like that, but it's like slow movement here. You're going here kind of chill, and then you have to make this bigger jump. Even though it's not massive, it makes this have very nice emphasis. And it contrasts super well with the really, really slow held sliders that are very curved. And again, the curved nature of it makes that cursor movement less demanding. Like if I had to move in a straight line versus, kind of just moving point to or end, start to end effectively on these sliders. With this phrase in the song, Celer uses these decelerating wide angles. So this is going to be a returning idea that you'll see. Pretty cool. Stands out nicely. It's nice. It's not intense. It's not intense there. There's this. It's a held slider, so like it's a 1/2 slider. So instead of doing like this, Celerih kind of has it go in on itself, so you kind of just wait here, right? You don't actually go out of the slider, you just chill here, which this is a nice touch, I guess. It helps bounce you into this arrangement here. For the very staccato sounds, Celerih uses this linear jump idea. And then Celerih also plays with like these rotations. So like here, it's one rotation for one musical phrase. And then the rotation changes here. And then, like, sometimes it's not really the rotation idea, but it's more of the parallel idea, where it's like this way, and then it's this way, and it kind of has a similar effect of grouping things. And this one's a little different. I'm not sure why. I don't think that Celerih was paying too much attention, frankly, to the whole rotation idea, but they're a little different every time, so it's like fine. A big thing is that they kept the spacing the same, so like because the spacing is the same on all of these, it's like fine, even though the rotation's a little different. For this sound, for these violins, they use the 3/4 sliders where the heads are overlapped on each other and they're just flipped like this. It's a pretty unique pattern. Like, this is the only sound that this pattern is used for. And the movement is very unique as well. So it stood out to me a lot when I was playing this, where you go out and then you go back in and change direction. Pretty unique movement. And those kinds of like unique movements for very specific sounds, unique patterns for very specific sounds, is something that I've adopted from this map. Even though that the ideas are super simplistic, they don't have to be complex ideas in order to have that extra spice on those important sounds. It kept the same idea of like the wide angles, but it increased the spacing. They're not linear anymore necessarily. They're just kind of wide angles. And then now the drums are coming in, so it's using more sharp angle stuff. Because it's instead of it being for the piano or violin or whatever, it's for a different drum arrangement. I really like these wide angles that go back in on themselves. As you can see, Celerih does quite a bit. They play they're fun for me to play. And then like this stuff like that, where you get this back and forth. Stopping the movement here for this is quite cool because it gets a lot of emphasis on that stop. And it makes this have a lot of impact. It's very cool. This is a common technique that most mappers at this point know about, but if you're a newer mapper, it's really nice if there's like sort of a gap in the rhythm where the song isn't doing anything, you can actually stop the movement entirely, and it has a very nice relationship there. Curved sliders like this, I think the idea is, obviously, the whole idea of the held sliders with the big curves, but then there also keeps that circular rotation going on, which then can be contrasted with the very sort of sharpness of the slider. And then the contrast here between the wide angle 1/2 and the very, very big spacing sharp angle 1/1. It has a very similar sort of level of intensity because it's so much bigger. And it feels quite nice, especially when you go into like the 1/2 here. So like you're kind of aiming this and then you have to snap it to 1. So it's really cool. Rotated sliders here. And because they're all the same slider, just rotated, it relates them. I know I talked about this in one of my videos, but the reason that this is circles is by having this circles, you can go into more sliders, and it there's contrast, whereas if Celerih did like more slider-based rhythms here, there wouldn't be any contrast moving into this next phrase because there's just more sliders. So by having a couple more circles here, you generate a little bit more contrast going into this more intense vocal phrase here. The triple here, this is obviously for the drum. But it has a nice effect of like stopping movement here, so you get this quick snap. And because it's like the snappiness to here, the player is sort of more inclined to quickly snap to here and then have to wait, and it gives that 2 a nice emphasis. Going back to that idea of like the back and forth circles there. It's a little bit different here, but this is going to be for that specific vocal phrase that you see here. That's going to be used repeatedly. Cool idea here to change the rotation. This is sort of like a triangle and how it's played, because this is all rotated 120 degrees, and it actually sort of plays like that, which is quite nice. It sort of folds in on itself. So, like using these, and it looks kind of freeform because it is, right? It doesn't actually necessarily look like it's a triangle, but it plays like one. And that's one of the nice things about Celerih maps is that they are sort of conventional in a lot of ways, but they don't look it. It's sort of, you have to go down but a little bit below to see that there's a lot of like sort of conventional stuff going on here. And that was something that I liked. I adopted it into many of my maps, sort of a little bit of extra flair instead of making your maps like super like in your face, obvious with everything they do. Have a little bit more tact. Same slider idea where it's rotated, just a little bit different shape here. The shape is kind of irrelevant there. These kinds of like patterns here with like the low spacing is very common of Russian mappers. So Celerih was definitely influenced heavily by Russian mappers back in the day when they were learning. So you get a lot of these kinds of arrangements where it's like this anti-jump of sorts to this 4. This is what it is. It's a stylistic thing, really. Going back to the idea of, you know, the big sounds are 1-1 slider or 1-1 circles, because using sliders here would make it stand out less, right? The sliders have been used commonly. There have been lots of longer 1-slider, 1-1, and even 2-1 sliders used throughout the map. So using these longer gaps with huge spacing creates tons and tons of contrast in the gameplay experience for these big hits. Held slider into big fast kick slider. Really nice build up here where the sliders are rotated. It uses that same idea of like the grouping of 2 and then rotating them so that they're very clearly related in the fact that they're always paralleled in this group of 2. And then they're sort of just like always the same shape. They're just rotated. And in this case, they're scaled. So they're actually increasing the slider velocity gradually for that buildup, as well as the spacing, which is a very satisfying buildup. Rising tension, and then it does this. And this is like such a fun pattern, I feel like. I don't really have much to say on this, but it captures that staccato of the song here just so perfectly. And it's very simple on how it does it, but it captures it very well. Very held slider here. And then you get the big explosion and intensity. I do wish Celery had done the anti-jump here, personally, because it would keep that energy. I think that it's kind of sucky to have this circle here, because you get all this energy into this, and then you don't really get to experience it here. But it does make this one have a ton of impact. I just don't know if it necessarily warrants it. I'd rather have this. So yeah. Again, the rotation of the sliders here this time, they're all slightly rotated instead of exactly paralleled. They're rotated in that even amount. So, let's see. What's cool about this is that it changes the rotation, or the Celery changes the rotation where the big hit is. So instead of continuing this clockwise rotation, you go up here, and now you're going to be going counterclockwise, right? With this slider, it gets you to go a counterclockwise direction. So it makes this slider have a lot more impact because we established this very constant clockwise rotation for an extended period of time. I think that even depending on how you play it, this could actually be where the rotation sort of changes a little bit, because it sort of feels more sharp angle instead of wide. But the rotation definitely changes here. And you get this wide angle jump, which is really satisfying to play. And because the movement doesn't really, like, it's a very specific kind of movement where you have to, go here, and then you slow down, and then speed up again. So you gotta kind of aim it. It gives this 3 quite a bit of emphasis, and it makes this whole pattern stand out quite nicely. And there was a sort of prominent vocal phrase right here. So you have these more standout sliders. Celery does use some of like these sliders that go in on themselves ideas, and most of the time it is done intentionally to facilitate that sort of direction change, right? You kind of continue on your way this way, and then you go this way. Versus if I just did this, you start the slider by going in that direction instead of changing direction midway through the slider. It just feels a little different. It makes the slider, in my opinion, stand out more. It also helps reduce the spacing, right? So the spacing on this is less than this, and that can be a nice factor too, if that's a consideration. But at the end of the day, some of these decisions are stylistic, but they're nice. It plays different enough because sort of, again, you're incentivized to go this way, but you actually change direction partway through the slider. And then you have the stop, and then you create the exact same movement because you stop it, and then you have to accelerate here. And then we got a nice stream. It's a really well-designed stream in that you have a big wide-angle energy and you continue going, and then you change direction on the big hit there. It's much more exaggerated and obvious than a lot of stream maps would do. And even though that there isn't so much, like, there's a bit of a spacing change here, but a big thing is that that movement, even though it's only 2 objects here, starting that, like, sort of having that direction the opposite direction, that movement is actually a continuation of what was going on before. So even though it only looks like it's 2 circles, you have this entire phrase that was leading up to that direction change, and that direction change, the result stands out a lot more. And then, of course, the acceleration there fits the intensity of the song very nicely. This one, you go left, but you actually have to go right, so there's this sort of big intensity here to making this big. And I think the idea of this curvature is Celery is trying to get you to play it kind of like this, with a big sort of sweeping wide angle. I think it won't really have much of an effect on how this one is played, but my guess is that it will have a effect on how you sweep into this one, which is kind of nice. So there's a nice movement concept there. And sometimes these kind of movement concepts don't work for everyone, right? So depending on how good you are at the game and that kind of thing, you may play it more cursor dancey, and you may play it more like Auto does, where it's just like straight shot there, and it doesn't do any sort of the fluff. It kind of just depends on the person, but you kind of do your best to accommodate your specific target audience, if you will, when you make your choices. And then again, this is like the sort of similar idea with the head, but on the tail this time, where it helps to facilitate that direction change. A rotation idea with the pairs of twos, but this time the rotation, or sorry, what did I say? The groups of two with the like sort of rotation change in that they're rotated 60 degrees, but in this case, your cursor changes from a clockwise direction to a counterclockwise direction of sorts. So it's like this, counterclockwise, but then you're also going outwards. So it's instead of that continuous circle, you're going outwards. It's a nice variation where it keeps the same idea as what we established before, but it varies it slightly so that it feels unique and new without getting repetitive. And then we have the back and forth jumps here. And because Celery doesn't really use back and forth jumps like this ever, like, and also this is sort of like the most geometric shape that I've seen in this map. You know, it's actually like basically a pentagon, a star pattern of sorts. It does stand out nicely. It does stand out for this vocal phrase. And then there's also this where you have a very long linear slider with the circle stacked on itself. And one, this is unique because most of the time these longer vocals are sort of some sort of curve. There hasn't really been any sliders this long used that are completely straight. And the long straightness of this slider forces you to actually play most of it before you can go back to the head. So even though it's stacked on the head, you can't abuse the slider leniency nearly as much as if it was like curved inwards. Like if it was curved inwards like this, you don't even move on the slider, you just stay here. But because it's out, you actually have to move out. And I think that most of the time, because of how slow it is, you're actually going to go outwards the entire time. And it's going to get this nice back and forth idea going on. So this one's one of the interesting rhythms in the song. So if we actually slow it down and you can listen to it, there isn't actually a circle here. There isn't actually a sound there, so it should probably be more like this. But Celery does hit sound it with a whistle, so it's additively hit sounded. So when I play it with the effects, you don't even tell that there's a circle missing there, or that circle shouldn't really be there. And it sets this up, this idea of this double, so effectively it plays kind of like this, which is a very, very unique movement in the song, in the map, I mean. So it's quite cool, but it doesn't. The nice thing about the slider tails is that it does map some of the other sounds here. So there is, I think, a drum there. And you see the idea there. I am getting messaged up the wazoo. Oh my goodness. Please ignore the Steam sounds. Okay. So we're going to come back to this idea here later, but this is going to be sort of this, for this end outro part of the Ki, Celery uses this doubles idea, this sort of creating this doubles that is moving in a linear manner. So what's nice about this is that you don't actually play the kick slider. If you do, it's kind of working against you, because if you just go like this, it's actually easier to play. So there's that. Coming back to the idea that we introduced before the key eye. This is all just a repeat. But again, it comes back here. Notice that it didn't happen anywhere else but here, right? So that's a really important thing. It's comboed to signify that it's significant and stands out. It separates, the combo separates it from the patterns around it. And then celerih moves circles around the pattern instead of inside of the pattern to give it sort of its space. And then here's the doubles idea comes back for the, and it's a very chaotic sort of sound here with like the guitar and the drums and all sorts of weird stuff going on. But what I think is so interesting about this pattern is that this doesn't exist. This doesn't exist. This one is not even a drum. And then the rest of it's fine. But like, the reason actually I think there is actually a very small kick there, but there's a bigger sound here. There's a bigger drum there. So like this would be a more literal interpretation of this rhythm, right? This is what most people would do. But this one stands out way less in terms of its actual gameplay experience. Like this is just so basic, right? You know, circle, triple, or in this case a double, right? Whatever it is. Most mappers would probably do like something like this to get rid of the sort of double. They would do whatever it takes to get rid of the doubles, because most people do not like doubles. Most sort of generic mappers at least try to avoid it in their maps. But celerih really embraces sort of the awkwardness of the double, and it matches so well with the awkwardness of this vocal phrase, combined with the sort of sharpness, the jaggedness of this pattern. It's really quite a nice touch. And then the stacked slider with the 1/2 circle or 1/2 slider, and then you do the same exact pattern but with a different rhythm, like mirrored. It's kind of a nice touch. Lots of rotation stuff going on here. So like with this, it's clear that celerih wants you to sort of play it like this, big circle. Again, pulling back in on itself to help facilitate that direction change. Otherwise, you have to go like way out here, and that spacing is really big, and it just feels completely different when you do it like this versus when you do it like this. I don't know if I have a great way to explain that necessarily, but it's a nice touch. But like when you look at this, look at sort of the cursor and how much it's kind of bouncy a little bit, right? There's lots of like this sort of flowiness with the rapid, but there's also these rapid sort of changes in cursor velocity, which make this section feel very dynamic, and it matches the vocals nicely. And then you have this like sort of crazy guitar coming in here, so it's more sharp angles here. Pulling in the idea of the stacks again. But now we have this, they're overlapped, the 1, 1, and then you have the 1/2 that are overlapped exactly, so it's, a big snap there. It's nice. I like that. I took a lot of like overlapping ideas from this map. This is something that really good mappers oftentimes do, is that, if you're ending and you have a longer gap, it's really nice if you put the object that follows that gap right on the last object that you played, because this is sort of where the player's cursor is usually going to reside. They might go back to the center, but they're usually going to stay somewhere in this area. So by having that follow-up, it sort of gives that map some continuity. And then you can play with that if you want to surprise somebody. You put it on the very farthest part of where that was, right? So if it was down here, maybe you go up there, and, when that break ends, they get surprised. They're like, oh crap, I got to go up there. Versus in this case, they want that hit to be... they don't really want to surprise the player in that way. They want it to sort of be the impact on the slider instead of a little bit before it, where the surprise factor would play in. Kind of just depends on the effect that you want. And they can be used interchangeably for the most part. Bringing back the idea of these parallel 1/2 jumps, or like 1/2 jumps, I should say. And they're used super tastefully. Like, a lot of mappers would do something like this, right? Where it's like very sort of overspaced and egregious. But Celerih uses these 1/2, 1/2 jumps really tastefully, where they're low space. They're not really the focus. Like, they contrast well enough by being a bunch of jumps in a map that really doesn't use jumps like this. And it does create sort of that more like aim, like flow aim versus snap aim feeling. So that's that aspect too. Wide angle, sort of constant rotation, decelerating. So the idea of this is that it creates one continuous phrase, even though there's all these individual things going on. And it's also extremely different from what's going on around it. It's not used anywhere. So it's nice. And then we got some stuff going on here. Celerih plays around a lot with like the phrasing, where most mappers would probably ignore this one and they'd start the jumps here. And this is probably what I would do, where, you know, to have that consistent big hit there. But Celerih prioritizes more of the vocals, and they interpret the vocals a little differently. It's not really the focus necessarily on the snare there. Plus, there's also the aspect that, you know, you're coming out of this slider, you have a big jump here, then you have the small jump here, and so this actually has more of an emphasis than if I did this, right? Like, if I did this, then, then a 4 sort of, then the 1 has no emphasis, effectively, because it's the same thing as the 4. But doing this, you know, you have that cursor momentum change. And then some nice stream stuff going on here. I think some of it might be a little additive. Not really. But, like, the phrasing is very clear. There's enough of a direction and feeling change on each of these that you actually feel this. And are incentivized to play it like it looks. Double. This was used before, actually, so this really slow slider into the kick slider. This actually exact pattern arrangement was basically used earlier on the map. The slider here keeps that circular rotation. So if they didn't use this nick in the slider here, the rotation would change. So this keeps that circular rotation. And then that allows the rotation to sort of change here. Which makes sense, because this is a different sort of part of the vocal phrase. And this is the same exact build-up as before, right? It's a little bit more extreme in this one than it was in the last one. But it's the same idea. And this is the same idea as before, and the last one. Like, all these ideas, again, they're now we're in the second chorus. A lot of them are going to be taken from the first chorus. So you can just sort of look at them together to compare. But this level of consistency was something at the time when I was like learning this map I struggled with. So sort of seeing how a more experienced mapper would take the same ideas and adapt them so that there's enough variety that it doesn't get boring, while still keeping the same core concept, is a really good thing to take from this map, I think. In this case, they use triples for these sort of sounds, and then the kick sliders here, which is this is a very different rhythm, like, that's used in the rest of the map. The nice thing about the triples, so triples and kick sliders are kind of able to be used interchangeably to some degree, or like really it's doubles that are used interchangeably, but you get the idea. The nice thing about the triples is that they stop the movement, so you have these two sort of stopped movements, and then you have the continuous movement from the kick sliders. It really contrasts nicely, and it's clearly done because they're actually parallel to each other, right? They're like right next to each other, and they're going on the same axis. And then bringing back the very big 1-1 spacing, where it kind of rotates as well, which is cool. It's really important that the 1-1 spacing is so big, so spaced, because it's a very intense part of the song. So you got to have the intensity, but the 1-1 does make it contrast really strongly from what's used elsewhere in the map, so it makes it stand out a lot. So you got to have that intensity aspect, but you also have the contrast aspect, and just using like longer sliders or faster sliders wouldn't really have nearly as much of an effect, sort of a contrast or a emphasis, as these sliders do. Bringing back the big slider. But this one is like that idea of the held vocal. So big circular sort of slider. But this one's faster, right? And then you had to stop at the end here. So because it's so big, you actually have to follow the curvature. We're bringing back the linear things from the previous section now, because this is now just basically a repeat. And this is the sort of decelerating wide angles from the very intro part of the map. And now we're in the bridge. So the bridge is usually when Celerih gets a little funny with things, especially using some funnier shapes. And this is something that Celerih does on a lot of their maps. So you do some funnier shapes like this, which kind of have a little bit of extra pizzazz for the specific guitar that was there. So so there's really nice, like, repetition of some of these ideas, right? Where you have the square, and then you repeat the square, but you change the orientation of it so it feels completely different. And of course, it's overlapped, so you can tell it's clearly related. Whereas like this one uses some symmetry ideas where you have this, and then you have this, and you have this, which they're just constantly flipping back and forth, so it's symmetrical. So that's pretty nice stuff. And then it builds up nicely to this symmetry idea where it's this build up, which we sort of had the accelerating slider idea introduced here, right? So this is a continuation of this accelerating slider idea, but over here it was more intense with the vocals, so they use 1/2 sliders. Over here, the vocals are not here, so you have this building up slider idea, but they're really long held sliders instead. And then, of course, the triplets that are stacked on it make you stop. You have to, like, play this, stop, play this, stop. So it makes the slider itself have all that impact. Whereas if they didn't have that and it was just continuing from this into this, you kind of have more of no individual slider would really stand out as much there. It would sort of feel much more conjoined. But the stacks make it feel more staccato where each individual slider is emphasized. which matches the song, of course, right? It's all done to match the song. And all this is going to be a repeat of the same idea. Now we have deceleration for the changing BPM. And then at the end of the map, there's a nice circle and slider to say fuck you to the players who gave up and stopped playing. So, a little bit of funny stuff going on. But this map is actually really consistent. I like that the ideas that it uses are not super... They're not like necessarily abstract, right? They're very simplistic ideas, but they're not also in your face. You kind of have to know to look for them. But it creates a very engaging experience for the player. And it's a nice map to look at and sort of study because it is really well constructed and put together. Very strong consistency across each section with enough variation so that it doesn't get boring. The important parts of the song stand out. They're emphasized. They're unique, right? So like the unique things in the song are unique in the map. And that's, to me, one of the most important aspects in any good map is that when the song does something unique, you map it in a unique way and you try to save that unique thing that you did for that unique sound, right? So you don't sort of mix and match. And there's a lot of instances in this map where there was a unique sound that didn't really get used very much, and Celerih mapped it in a unique way that didn't get used anywhere else. Which, of course, I hope that more maps can adopt and do. And I think that will make a lot of your maps better and more interesting and engaging. I have many more maps that are like more abstract than this that do very similar things. But fundamentally, what I like about this map is that it sort of takes those ideas from those more abstract maps, like what Undead Capulet does, and it puts it into a more digestible, broadly appealing package, which is quite nice. Quite nice. All right. Hopefully that made sense. I kind of rambled. But yeah, this is a cool map, and go check it out. See ya.